Alan Chumley 3.3. Sports science. Arousal is described as the intensity of behaviour that refers to the degree of emotional energy which is felt on different occasions and different situations. Arousal has two different states. Somatic arousal is the physiological changing state of the body. These changes could be related to increases in heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate. The mental state, or the cognitive psychological arousal, relates to the changes that occur in the mind, such as negative thoughts or changes in worry. Through different theories, arousal can be explained. Arousal is linked to the energized state that drives a person to be able to perform skills. Drive theory suggests that there is a positive correlation with the arousal and performance. As arousal increases, the performance increases. An example of this is a second serve in tennis. Due to the increased arousal level, the performer gets the second in. Although the quality of the skill depends on how well the skill has been learnt and whether or not it has been grooved. For example, another example would be a cognitive juggler will struggle with a high level of arousal compared to an autonomous learner. This is because of the relevant motor programs haven't been grooved yet, and therefore usually the dominant response becomes evident when the arousal is raised, as it is the go-to response and is unlikely to be correct. Dominant behaviour for cognitive learners will likely to produce a mistake or ill-timed performance. A beginner is seen to learn better at lower levels of arousal and seen to have better performance of the skill on the lowest end of the scale. On the other hand, a performer at the autonomous stage of learning may be more likely to produce a dominant response which is technically correct, as the stimulus-response bond has been grooved. An example of this would be a free kick in the 90th minute of a semi-final. And they scored a free kick. This is because the performer is at the autonomous stage and the skill has been grooved and has been practiced under high levels of arousal before. One problem with drive theory is that it doesn't explain why athletes in high arousal states fail, therefore a loss in credibility for this theory. Moreover, once the individual has completed the task and is seen as being fulfilled by the performer, then drive to perform will reduce. Inverted U theory suggests that performance is at its optimum when the level of arousal is not too high or not too low. The optimum level of arousal is needed to display peak performance or get in the zone. Being over-aroused may be caused by any environment. Inverted U predicts that performance will deteriorate after arousal increases after the optimum point. Here, the performer becomes over-aroused and fails to learn or perform motor skills, and decline as they become anxious if they are over-aroused, and their performance usually suffers because of this. The model needs to be adapted according to different skills. For example, gross and simple skills that require less control, like a rugby tackle or a deadlift in weightlifting, is a simple skill. So great amounts of strength is needed, therefore high amounts of arousal can be handled. On the other hand, fine and complex skills like a snooker shot will require less arousal, as it needs greater amount of focus to complete the skill. This principle can be suggested for different personalities like introverted and extroverted characters. Introverts can only handle little amounts of arousal because high levels of arousal are naturally occurring within their brains, so tend to avoid external stimulation. Extroverts, on the other hand, are seen to have and RAS that inhibits the effects of external sensory stimuli, which leads to areas of the brain experiences low levels of arousal. Catastrophe theory suggests that performance increases in correlation to arousal up to an optimum point by converted U theory. Although past the optimum point of arousal there will be an extreme decline in performance. The drop in performance the optimum performance is said to be because of the combination of somatic and cognitive arousal. An example of this would be a goalkeeper who is one-on-one with a player and takes them out to concede a penalty. During that moment, cognitive anxiety, where the goalkeeper is worried about failing or negative thoughts cross his mind, in combination with sweating, which is somatic anxiety. The penalty was given, and the goalkeeper now needs to relax below the point of arousal at which the catastrophe occurred. The arousal decreases, so the penalty is saved, although performance will not improve and not go back into its original optimum level. Although it is very difficult for a performer in a highly aroused situation like a penalty to reduce the amount of arousal in order to save the penalty. Anxiety is a negative aspect that is caused as a result of stress and can be caused by worry. Anxiety includes irrational thoughts and fear of failure. There are two types of anxiety, cognitive and somatic anxiety. Cognitive anxiety is associated with apprehensive thoughts, that worry that a performer has about their lack of ability to complete a task. It may lead to feeling of the inability to cope and attention narrowing. This may occur prior to the big game, but the performer focuses on what could go wrong in the match. For example, negative thoughts. On the other hand, somatic anxiety is concerned with the physiological effects of anxiety, such as sweaty palms and increased heart rate. This can be seen in a rugby changing room before the game, as players are hyping themselves up. When levels of somatic and cognitive anxiety are high, then performance can be negatively affected. Trait theory suggests that anxiety is part of someone's personality and is relatively stable. It is how dangerous a person perceives a circumstance and then responds to this threatening perception with anxiety. It occurs with the individual's perception of their ability and how it can't meet the perception of the demands required to execute the skill required. Essentially, when the importance of a situation is too significant for the performer. For some people, they are generally more nervous than others. An example of this would be a swimmer standing on the blocks at swimming. An anxious person may fear the challenge is too great for them because they have greater stress levels, therefore arousal levels are high, and so fears and worries are more likely to creep in because of their personality type. For others, standing on a swimming block and jumping off may be fine, as they may have lower levels of stress. State anxiety refers to a person's immediate condition in any one situation. It is usually a temporary emotional response to a situation that is perceived as threatening. For example, a penalty in the Champions League final will bring on an immediate anxiety because the outcome is feared as threatening. If both state anxiety brought up by a situation, and trait, how their perception of their ability perceives the circumstances as threatening, are present and at heightened levels, then it is likely that catastrophe theory will occur. This is because If an increase in somatic anxiety, there's a continuous increase in cognitive anxiety, and physiological arousal, then performance can suddenly deteriorate, causing a catastrophe for sports performers. Controlling anxiety will help create circumstances where the performer is focused and confident with their performance. One factor that affects competitive anxiety in competition is the type of task involved. This could mean the type of risk associated with the task ahead is perceived as too great for the performer and therefore likely to have high levels of anxiety, both cognitive and somatic, as doubt impacts the breathing rate and increases as this occurs. To control this type of anxiety, positive self-talk would reduce competitive anxiety. Another factor that affects sports performance would be the fear of the competition importance. For example, like a derby game or cup final in football, the use of visualization would prevent and help the anxiety management, as it would reduce the worry and allows the performers to focus on relevant cues before the skill is executed. For example, stimulating a mental image of a somersault on a beam in gymnastics. A fear of a crowd could cause anxiety. This can be explained through social facilitation, as the presence of others could improve or inhibit performance. This would be social inhibition, depending on your traits and skill level. The presence of an audience may arouse the performer, and state anxiety combined with trait anxiety could overwhelm the performer, and therefore the dominant response would be incorrect. To prevent this, selective attention could be used to focus on the relevant cues, like the landing in a long jump. Fear of injury can increase anxiety levels as a result have a hindrance on performance. To manage the fear of injury, biofeedback could be used to measure the heart rate, which can then be presented to the performer, who can try to calm heart rate and breathing rate. Other management techniques to reduce anxiety in the moment are deep breathing, will reduce the breathing rate and increase tidal volume and amount of oxygen in the muscles. It also allows you to regain composure as there is a moment of pause. A productive warm-up will allow a performer to focus on the skills needed to be executed during the game. A disadvantage to management techniques of anxiety is that when deep breathing is used, it's in the moment and would be unuseful during the skill. For example, a rugby conversion, prior to starting their run-up, they will take deep breaths to reduce anxiety levels, although during the run-up and the kick, it is hard to execute the skill and take deep breaths. During this moment in the run-up, the performer's cognitive anxiety will increase, depending on the personality. They may see the kick as an opportunity or a threat. Another limitation to biofeedback is that it has to be done in certain conditions and monitored, and therefore it is expensive and time consuming.